She wore a blazer and a cross necklace, just a tired young mother trying to make her flight, completely removing the disguise of Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary. But to the airport staff, she was a problem to be silenced, until the doors opened, and the man who walked in changed everything. What happened next reminded the whole country what justice, dignity, and American courage truly look like. What would you do if someone humiliated your wife in public for simply asking a question? Please join me until the end, and don't forget to subscribe to follow the most interesting stories. The terminal clock glowed 6:12 a.m., blinking steadily like a heartbeat against the cold steel of Logan International. A fog of exhaustion wrapped around Karoline Leavitt as she stepped out of the car and adjusted the strap on her purse. The wind whipped through the Boston air, stinging her face, but she barely felt it. She wasn't here as the youngest White House press secretary, not today. Today she was just a grieving woman, daughter, goddaughter, mother. Her godmother, Aunt Claire, had passed away just 2 days before, a woman who'd taught her to bake cornbread, who read the Bible with her on Sunday mornings, who sat front row during Karoline's first speech in Concord. Aunt Claire wasn't just family. She was faith, fire, and forgiveness, all wrapped in one person. And today, Karoline had to get to Charleston, South Carolina in time to speak at her funeral. She wore a plain black dress under her winter coat. No designer brand, no entourage. Just a mother who had breastfed her son at 3 a.m. and kissed her husband goodbye in the driveway. She tucked a small leather-bound Bible into her handbag, the one her godmother had gifted her at graduation with the inscription, "Walk humbly, child, but never walk afraid." As Karoline approached the Southwest Airlines counter, she balanced her phone in one hand and her suitcase in the other. Emails, texts, press updates. They could wait. Today, none of it mattered. All she needed was to check in, board the flight, and make it to the church by 11 Sioux. But sometimes, the simplest things become battlegrounds. She walked up to the counter, polite but brisk. The young man behind it glanced up. His eyes paused on her face, flicked briefly to the cross pendant at her neck, then down to the keyboard. He barely smiled. Karoline handed over her confirmation number and ID. Flight 372 to Charleston. I'd like to check my carry-on. The man typed, frowned, then glanced at her again. You're not in the system, he said flatly. Karoline blinked. I checked in an hour ago through the app. My boarding pass is right here. She held up her phone. He looked, his lips pressed thin. There's been a change. A change to what? You'll have to wait, he said, already waving to another employee. Her chest tightened. The minutes ticked louder than the clock. Every second that passed was one more moment away from honoring Aunt Claire. I have a funeral, Karoline said, trying to stay steady. Can you please tell me what's going on? A second staff member joined, this one older but colder. She didn't even look Karoline in the eye. She's been flagged, the woman said. Karoline's brows furrowed. Flagged for what? Random review. You'll need to step aside. Random. She had taken this route 3 times this year. Never once had she been randomly pulled. Ma'am, please step aside. A few heads began to turn. An older couple glanced up from a bench nearby. A businessman in a Red Sox cap tilted his head. I'm happy to comply, Karoline said calmly, but I'd like to speak to a supervisor. That's when the first agent said it. Security, please. Her throat went dry. Excuse me? She asked. I haven't done anything wrong. The second woman stiffened. You're not being compliant. Karoline looked down at her feet. This wasn't confusion. This was escalation. She stood still, tall, quiet, eyes straight ahead. She had been called names on live television, doxxed online, harassed at campaign rallies, but this moment, in this airport, stripped away all titles. To them, she wasn't the press secretary. She was just another woman asking too many questions. And as TSA approached, she pulled her government-issued ID from her wallet. I'm Karoline Leavitt. I'm traveling for a personal funeral. I've already cleared security many times this year. The officers didn't even glance at the badge. One simply said, We need to check your belongings. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. Fine, she whispered. They opened her suitcase. Her blouse for the service was unfolded, her toiletries scattered, and then, from the inside pocket, The small Bible slipped out. Aunt Claire's Bible. One officer bent to pick it up. He looked unsure, almost embarrassed, and set it gently on the table. Karoline saw it happen like it was in slow motion, a sacred book handled like contraband. By now, a woman near the vending machines had her phone out. A man muttered, "Isn't that the woman from Trump's campaign?" Karoline didn't say a word. Her silence became louder than anything else in that terminal. She watched the officer pat down her coat, then gesture for her to step to the side wall. One of them spoke again. "Ma'am, are you carrying anything we should know about?" Karoline didn't flinch. "Only grief," she said softly. When they finally let her sit, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the kind of fatigue that comes from having to prove your worth again and again and again. She took out her phone, typed a single message. "I was pulled. I need you." Then hit send. The moment after that message left her screen, she sat back in the cold metal chair, crossing her arms slowly over her chest. Her Bible was back in her lap. Her wedding band glinted faintly under the fluorescent lights. The terminal air was sharp, sterile, the kind that never quite settles on your skin, always slightly too cold or too dry. Karoline sat still in the metal chair, eyes steady but unfocused, like a soldier waiting on orders that had already gone sideways. Around her, the clatter of rolling suitcases and overhead boarding calls continued, as if none of this was happening. She wasn't crying, she wasn't raising her voice, but that's the part that hurt the most. Because even in silence, she was being treated like a threat. "It's just policy, ma'am," the TSA agent returned, accompanied now by a third officer, this one with stripes on his collar and a walkie clipped to his belt. "Ma'am," he began, voice rehearsed, "we're going to need to conduct a secondary screening. Your credentials have triggered a system alert." Karoline slowly raised her head, the same way she might at a press conference when a reporter asked a question meant to twist her words. "I showed you my ID," she replied. "It's federal. I'm not hiding anything. You've had my bags, you've had my boarding pass, so please tell me what exactly I've triggered." The officer didn't answer, just gestured toward the bag once more. And that's when it happened, again. As they began to unzip the same bag she'd already watched them rummage through minutes earlier, they pulled out her blouse, her heels, a small envelope marked "Eulogy Notes" in her own handwriting. And there, her Bible. This time, the officer set it on the table like it was nothing. Karoline reached for it, gently placing it back into her lap. One of the staff nearby snorted under their breath. A moment later, a younger TSA agent leaned toward the main officer and whispered, "She's that political woman, Leavitt, from Trump's team." The supervisor looked up. Something shifted in his posture. But he didn't call off the screening. Passengers continued walking past. Some glanced, others kept moving. But a small cluster had begun to form at a respectful distance. They weren't loud, they weren't angry, just watching. One woman in her 60s, with silver hair and a rosary tucked into her coat pocket, caught Karoline's eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry." Karoline gave her a nod. Not because it made things better, but because it reminded her she wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. She was simply standing in a place where the rules shifted the moment she questioned them. "Ma'am, step further back." Now they were treating her like a full-blown suspect. An agent barked, "Stand over there, arms out. We'll need a full pat down." She stepped forward, her hands lifted calmly. The cold hands of procedure swept across her arms, her waist, the back of her knees. They didn't ask permission. They didn't explain why. Just the sterile hum of a process detached from conscience. "Do you have any medical devices?" one asked. "I just gave birth 3 weeks ago," Karoline answered, voice flat. There was a pause, a flicker of surprise in the agent's eyes. But again, they didn't stop. "Your bag will be screened again." "I already cooperated," she said. "Ma'am," the senior TSA agent said, "we respond to perceived threats." She raised her chin slightly. "What threat? I asked about my boarding pass." He shifted. "The gate agent said you were becoming agitated." And there it was. The accusation without volume. A woman of faith, wearing black for a funeral, asking one question too many, now labeled agitated. The same label used 1,000 times before on mothers, veterans, pastors, nurses, anyone who dared question a system that never expected to be questioned. Boarding time slipping away. Karoline turned slightly toward the gate window. From her angle, she could just see the monitor blinking. Boarding, Flight 372 to Charleston. On time. Her eyes dropped to the time, 7:08 a.m. Her flight was boarding without her. She closed her eyes, thought about the little girl in Charleston who would be looking up from the church pew, waiting for Aunt Karoline to come through the doors. She thought of Aunt Claire's husband, now widowed, who had called her yesterday crying because he didn't know how to pick the hymn. She thought of the speech she had written, the one her godmother had asked her to deliver if she ever got called home before the spring flowers. Her jaw clenched. This wasn't about inconvenience anymore. This was punishment in plain sight. A man nearby pulled out his phone and quietly began recording. Not flashy, not loud, just documenting. Another woman approached one of the TSA officers. She hasn't yelled. She hasn't even spoken above a whisper. Why is she being treated like this? The officer didn't reply, just shifted uneasily, eyes darting toward the terminal entrance. The original gate agent, the young man who had first dismissed Karoline, was nowhere to be seen. Cowards often flee the moment accountability walks in. Next, the text notification that meant everything. As Karoline was told she was being denied boarding pending resolution, her phone buzzed once more in her lap. A message from William. I'm parking. Give me 5 minutes. She didn't smile, not because she wasn't relieved, but because she had used every ounce of her energy to hold in the hurt. She could feel the burn behind her eyes, but still, no tears. She wouldn't give them that. Not here. This is beyond policy now. The TSA supervisor finally looked at her directly. His tone tried to shift to friendly. We'd like to offer you a seat on the next flight. Karoline didn't even blink. What time does it leave? He hesitated. 11:55. She nodded slowly. I'll miss the funeral. The crowd heard that. Several gasped quietly. One woman whispered, Oh my God. The man filming lowered his phone for a second and muttered, What is wrong with this country? Karoline remained silent. She folded her eulogy notes, tucked the Bible back into her bag, buttoned her coat. Then she stood. And that was when the double doors at the edge of the terminal opened. He walked in. A shift in the wind. William Leavitt, husband, veteran, former JAG officer, now CEO of a defense tech company known for standing up to bureaucratic overreach. He wasn't the tallest man in the terminal, but somehow when he walked in, people moved. Not because he demanded it, but because he carried the air of someone who'd never needed to raise his voice to make an entire courtroom go still. He spotted Karoline in seconds. She didn't wave, didn't signal. He just knew. William Leavitt didn't walk like a man in a hurry. He didn't need to. The double doors hissed open behind him, but it was the weight of his presence that made the temperature in the terminal drop half a degree. He wore a simple black peacoat, no tie, no political badge. His wedding band gleamed when the light hit just right, and in his hand, a leather folder with a Department of Justice seal barely visible from where. His steps were even, deliberate, but each one landed like a gavel. Karoline didn't rise to meet him. She didn't need to. Their eyes locked across the floor like soldiers exchanging silent orders. He walked right past the murmuring TSA officers, past the screeners, the checkpoint desks, the staff who suddenly had more interest in their clipboards than the woman they'd just spent 45 minutes trying to humiliate. And he stopped 3 feet in front of his wife. Are you hurt? He asked. Karoline shook her head once. No, just tired. Then his eyes moved slowly to the agents. Who's in charge? William asked, his tone even, too even. A middle-aged TSA supervisor stepped forward, clearing his throat. I'm Senior Agent Trowbridge, and you are? William didn't hesitate. William Leavitt, retired U.S. Marine, former Chief Counsel, 3rd District Court of Appeals, current federal contractor cleared to TSSCI level, and husband of the woman your staff just profiled, detained, and degraded without cause. The officer's face froze mid-expression. I'd like to know, William continued, who made the decision to remove her from the boarding list, who requested a random screening, and who decided that a federal badge wasn't enough to verify her identity. The TSA supervisor sputtered. That's a question for the airline, sir. Then go get the airline, William said simply. She was being difficult. The young gate agent, Cullen, 20-something, nervous posture, smirk from earlier now erased, appeared like he had just walked out of a nightmare. William turned to him slowly. "You're the one who called security?" The agent swallowed. She was being difficult. William tilted his head slightly. Define difficult. She questioned her reassignment, asked why she wasn't in the system. Did she raise her voice? No. Use threatening language? No, sir. Refuse to comply? She asked to speak to a supervisor. William let the silence hang for a moment. Then he nodded. "Thank you for confirming," he said, "that my wife was removed from a flight, detained, and treated like a criminal for asking a question." By now, a dozen travelers had gathered within earshot, phones in hand, some pretending to scroll, others blatantly filming. Cullen's hands shook. The TSA agent's eyes darted nervously, and Karoline stood off to the side, not gloating, not angry, just watching. William stepped forward, addressing no one in particular, and everyone all at once. "You detained a federally credentialed official with no suspicion, no cause, and no explanation. You dismissed her badge. You delayed her travel. You violated her dignity." His voice never rose, but it filled every inch of that terminal. A woman near the gate whispered, "That's her husband? He looks like he could run the Senate." Another passenger added, "He doesn't even have to yell, you just feel it." At that moment, a gate supervisor arrived, clipboard in hand, face already pale. "Judge Leavitt," he began. "I'm not here as a judge," William interrupted. "I'm here as a husband and an American." The man nodded quickly. We can rebook her, first class, complimentary upgrade." William raised an eyebrow. "That's not what this is about." Karoline finally spoke, stepping forward beside him. "You're not trying to get me to Charleston faster," she said. "You're trying to undo the damage, and you can't." The gate agent stammered. "Ma'am, we didn't know who you were." Karoline's eyes hardened. "That's the problem. It shouldn't have mattered. When truth sounds like thunder." William turned back to the supervisor. "I want the name of the person who marked her for review, the reason logged into the system, and a written explanation for why none of your staff followed protocol when presented with federal credentials." The TSA agent cleared his throat again. "Sir, we'll need to involve our regional director." "You do that," William said, "and let them know that as of right now, you are liable for interference with the travel of a federal official, Title 18, Section 115. The agent's hands shook. William didn't need volume. He never had. Because the truth, when spoken with clarity and calm, can hit harder than any scream. The crowd awakens. Passengers began whispering louder now. "This is unreal." She didn't even say anything. "Imagine if this was your daughter." Phones tilted to better angles. Someone started live streaming. A college student in the corner was already tweeting out what he was witnessing, captioned, "Federal press secretary gets detained at Logan. Her husband just shut the whole place down without raising his voice. The part where they start to regret it." One of the TSA staff, the same man who'd handled her Bible, finally stepped forward. His eyes didn't meet hers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Karoline didn't reply, not out of pride, but because the apology was 43 minutes too late. And Claire's funeral would start in 1 hour. The eulogy she had written, still folded in her coat pocket. And no amount of first-class tickets or free flight vouchers could unbreak that promise. One line that cut through everything. William turned to the cluster of employees, still frozen near the podium. "You don't get to offer comfort," he said softly, "after you've denied someone their dignity." A hush fell again. People watched as Karoline slowly zipped her bag, tucked her Bible under her arm, and slipped her fingers into William's hand. Then she turned to the supervisor one last time. "I don't need you to fix it," she said. "I just need you to remember it. The next time you see someone who looks tired, or asks a hard question, or doesn't back down." William and Karoline stood side by side, a wall of calm defiance, as the gate supervisor fumbled for words. The weight of the moment pressed down on the terminal like a sudden storm. No sirens, no shouting. Just silence, the kind that makes people realize they were witnessing something important. Phones were everywhere now. Someone whispered, "They're streaming this on Facebook." Another added, "I hope the whole country sees this." And maybe, just maybe, that's what finally made the airline take this seriously. Not the credentials, not the Bible, not the injustice, but the eyes of the American people. "We'd like to offer rebooking." The gate manager finally stepped forward, out of breath, clipboard clutched tight to his chest. "Judge Leavitt, Miss Leavitt, we'd like to rebook you both first class on the next flight to Charleston, fully comped." Karoline didn't move, didn't blink. Her voice was so quiet, the manager had to lean in to hear. "I needed to be on the one that already left." A few feet away, a woman gasped quietly. William turned to the manager. "Why was her seat changed in the first place?" The manager cleared his throat. We're investigating that internally." William's tone was sharp. "No, you're scrambling." The words echoed across the space like a rifle crack. The moment they should have cared about. "We've never had something like this happen," the manager said. "You have," Karoline replied. "You just didn't expect it to happen to someone with a voice loud enough to be heard." The TSA agents now stood several feet away, as if hoping the proximity would absolve them of their role in what had unfolded. One of them looked down at his shoes, face burning with embarrassment. "We'd like to offer a formal apology," the supervisor began. Karoline cut him off. "You don't get to decide when dignity is restored. You only had the power to take it." Her voice was composed, but her hands shook slightly. William placed his hand on hers, steadying, anchoring, but he didn't speak. He knew the moment was hers. Make no mistake, this was discrimination. William stepped forward again, his tone crisp. "You escalated a non-confrontational question into a federal-level incident. You ignored credentials, you ignored her humanity, and you detained a mother, 4 weeks postpartum, trying to bury a woman she loved." The words hung in the air. A grandmother nearby clutched her purse tighter. A teenager filming wiped a tear from his cheek, then kept recording. William turned back to Karoline. "Are we staying?" Karoline looked around at the agents, the staff, the passengers now wide-eyed and watching. Then she turned back to him and shook her head. "No, there's nothing left here worth explaining." They walked out without a security escort. No forced smiles, no gift card bribes, just silence. A silence more powerful than any apology. And behind them, regret. Regret from staff who now realized who she was. But more importantly, regret from people who now saw what happens when you treat anyone, title or not, like they don't belong. Outside the terminal. The wind was still biting. Karoline leaned against the black sedan, her suitcase upright, her Bible clutched tightly against her ribs. Her phone vibrated with texts, staffers, reporters, family. One message from her aunt in Charleston simply read, "He would have been proud of you, sweetheart. Claire, too." Karoline swallowed hard. "I just wanted to give a eulogy," she said quietly. "I know," William replied, "but you gave something bigger." She looked up. "Did I do it right?" "You didn't give them what they wanted," he said. "You didn't fold. You stood still." And in that stillness, the whole country had started listening. Then, by mid-afternoon, the video had gone viral. Clips of Karoline calmly questioning TSA, the quiet confrontation with the gate agent, the exact moment William asked, "Did she raise her voice?" and silence the room. The comments were overwhelming. "This is what dignity under fire looks like. My wife was treated the same way last year. She cried in the bathroom while they laughed. That Bible in her lap broke me." From nurses to veterans, mothers to ministers, people saw themselves in Karoline. Because this wasn't just a political moment, it was a human one. Karoline didn't give interviews that day. She didn't go on Fox or Newsmax. She just wrote a short message, posted it to her social media with a photo of her Bible. This isn't about one gate or one flight or even one name. This is about how easily we dismiss dignity when we don't recognize the person in front of us. And it shouldn't take a badge or a title for someone to be treated like a human being. That single post was shared over 1 million times. 1 week later, a group of young interns at a town hall asked Karoline if she would talk about the airport. She paused, then smiled. "I didn't yell," she told them. "I didn't scream. I didn't post anything dramatic in real time." She looked out across the audience. "But what I did was refuse to let someone decide I didn't belong. And the moment you start believing you do belong, that your story matters, everything changes. The final clip that went viral wasn't Karoline speaking. It was a 71-year-old woman in Pennsylvania watching the video at her kitchen table with her husband. Her voice cracked as she looked into the camera and said, "I've been treated like that. I just never thought anyone would care." And with that, the moment wasn't about Karoline anymore. It was about all of us. If you believe dignity shouldn't require a title, if you've ever been talked down to, brushed aside, or treated like you didn't matter, this story is yours too. Share it, speak it, and never ever forget. Power doesn't always come with a badge. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding your hand.